Charles-Louis de Secondat, Baron de la Brède et de Montesquieu, was born on January 18, 1689, at the Château de la Brède, a family estate near Bordeaux, France. He was born into a wealthy noble family with his father Jacques de Secondat, a soldier and landowner, and his mother Marie-Françoise de Penel, who brought the barony of La Brède into the family. His mother died when he was 7, and he was raised primarily by his father and later educated at the Collège de Juilly, a prestigious Catholic school where he studied classical literature, history, and law. This privileged upbringing and early exposure to intellectual traditions shaped his later career as a philosopher and jurist, leading to his influential works like The Spirit of the Laws. Montesquieu was a young child aged 5 to 11, living primarily at the family estate Château de la Brède near Bordeaux, France. During these early years, he was educated at home, likely under the guidance of tutors, as was common for children of noble families. His mother, Marie-Françoise de Penel, died in 1696 when he was 7, a significant personal loss that left his father, Jacques de Secondat, to oversee his upbringing. Around 1700, at age 11, Montesquieu was sent to the Collège de Juilly, a prestigious Catholic school run by the Oratorian Order near Paris, where he began formal education in classical literature, Latin, history, and religious studies. This period laid the groundwork for his intellectual development, exposing him to the rigorous academic environment that shaped his later philosophical and legal thinking. Around 1705, he began studying law at the University of Bordeaux, a natural step for a young nobleman destined for a role in the judiciary or administration. The curriculum included Roman law, canon law, and French customary law, equipping him with a deep understanding of legal systems that would later inform his political philosophy. By 1708, he completed his studies and obtained a law degree, becoming a licensed lawyer. During this period, he lived in Bordeaux, a bustling port city, and was exposed to its vibrant intellectual and commercial environment, which likely sparked his interest in governance, trade, and societal structures. He also began engaging with local scholarly circles, including the Académie de Bordeaux, where he later presented early essays. His father, Jacques de Secondat, remained a guiding figure, steering him toward a career in public service. These years were formative, laying the intellectual and professional foundation for his future works, such as The Spirit of the Laws. The marriage took place in Bordeaux, France, where Montesquieu was establishing himself as a jurist and nobleman. Jeanne brought a substantial dowry, which bolstered Montesquieu's financial stability, allowing him to focus on his intellectual pursuits and manage his estates, including the Château de la Brède. Despite religious differences, Montesquieu was Catholic and Jeanne was Protestant. The marriage was pragmatic, reflecting the social and economic alliances common among the nobility. The couple had 3 children, Jean-Baptiste, Marie, and Denise. Jeanne managed household affairs and the family's properties, especially during Montesquieu's later travels and periods of intense writing. This union provided personal stability. As he began engaging more deeply with the Académie de Bordeaux and started working on early writings, including ideas that would later shape his satirical Persian letters. In 1721, he published Persian Letters, Lettres Persanes, a satirical novel written under a pseudonym, which became a literary sensation in France. The work, presented as letters between 2 Persian travelers critiquing French society, religion, and politics, showcased his wit and critical perspective, earning him widespread recognition among Enlightenment thinkers. The success allowed him to move in Parisian intellectual circles, engaging with salons and scholars like Fontenelle and Marivaux. During this time, he continued his duties as a magistrate in the Parlement of Bordeaux, a judicial position inherited in 1716, but grew increasingly restless with its routine, focusing more on writing and study. He also became active in the Académie de Bordeaux, presenting essays on science, politics, and history, which honed his analytical skills. By 1725, he began contemplating broader intellectual projects, including comparative studies of governments, influenced by his readings of classical texts and contemporary political thought. In 1727, his growing reputation led to his election to the prestigious Académie Française, cementing his status as a leading intellectual. This period also saw him managing his estates and family life with his wife, Jeanne de Lartigue, and their young children while preparing for his European travels starting in 1728, which would deeply shape his masterpiece, The Spirit of the Laws. Seeking to study diverse political systems, laws, and cultures firsthand, he left Bordeaux in 1728, accompanied by friends and leveraging his wealth and noble status to gain access to influential figures. He traveled through Austria, Hungary, Italy, Germany, Holland, and England, keeping detailed journals of his observations. In Vienna and Venice, he examined governance structures and local customs, noting the interplay of religion and state. His time in Italy, particularly in Rome, deepened his interest in classical history, later reflected in his 1734 work, Considerations on the Causes of the Greatness of the Romans and Their Decline. In 1729, he arrived in England, where he stayed, until 1731, immersing himself in its constitutional monarchy and parliamentary system. He attended sessions of Parliament, met intellectuals like Alexander Pope, and studied English law, which inspired his ideas on the separation of powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, as a safeguard against tyranny. He also joined a Masonic lodge, engaging with progressive ideas. During this period, he resigned from his judicial post in the Parlement of Bordeaux, selling it in 1728, freeing himself to focus on intellectual pursuits. His travels broadened his comparative approach to governance, laying the groundwork for his magnum opus, The Spirit of the Laws, 1748. Returning to France in 1731, he began synthesizing his observations into his writing. Montesquieu, aged 45, published Considerations on the Causes of the Greatness of the Romans and Their Decline, Considérations sur les causes de la grandeur des Romains et de leur décadence, a concise yet incisive historical analysis of the Roman Republic and Empire. Written in a clear, accessible style, the book drew on Montesquieu's observations from his 1728 to 1731 European travels, particularly his time in Rome, and his extensive reading of classical sources like Livy, Tacitus, and Polybius. In it, he examined the factors behind Rome's rise to power, its military discipline, civic virtue, adaptable institutions, and strategic expansion, and its eventual decline, which he attributed to overexpansion, corruption, loss of civic morality, and the concentration of power under emperors. Montesquieu argued that Rome's success stemmed from its ability to balance liberty and authority in the Republican era, while its fall resulted from internal decay and the erosion of checks on power. Published in Amsterdam to avoid French censorship, the work was well received for its insights into political dynamics and served as a precursor to his broader theories in The Spirit of the Laws, 1748, particularly on how geography, culture, and institutions shape a state's trajectory. During this year, Montesquieu was living primarily at his estate, Château de la Brède, managing family affairs with his wife, Jeanne de Lartigue, and engaging with intellectual circles in Bordeaux and Paris. The book solidified his reputation as a leading Enlightenment thinker. In 1748, Charles-Louis de Secondat, Baron de la Brède, et de Montesquieu, age 59, published his seminal work, The Spirit of the Laws, de l'Esprit des Lois, a monumental comparative study of political systems that cemented his legacy as a foundational Enlightenment thinker. Published in Geneva to evade French censorship, The book was the culmination of over 2 decades of study, drawing on his 1728-1731 European travels, particularly his observations of England's constitutional monarchy and his deep engagement with classical and contemporary texts. In it, Montesquieu analyzed 3 types of government: republics, based on civic virtue; monarchies, driven by honor; and despotisms, ruled by fear, examining how each functions according to its underlying principles and is shaped by climate, geography, culture, and religion. His most enduring contribution was the concept of the separation of powers, arguing that dividing government into legislative, executive, and judicial branches, with checks and balances, prevents tyranny and preserves liberty. This idea, inspired by England's system, profoundly influenced modern constitutional design, including the U.S. Constitution of 1787 and the French Revolution's framework. The book, spanning 31 chapters, also explored law's adaptability to specific societies, rejecting universal prescriptions. Despite its dense style, it gained widespread acclaim, though it faced criticism from the Catholic Church, leading to its placement on the Index of Prohibited Books in 1751. In 1748, Montesquieu was primarily at his Château de la Brède, managing his estates and family with his wife, Jeanne de Lartigue, while corresponding with intellectuals like Voltaire. The publication marked the peak of his intellectual career, establishing him as a global authority on governance. Living primarily at his Château de la Brède near Bordeaux and occasionally in Paris, he focused on refining his works, particularly The Spirit of the Laws, 1748, which faced ongoing scrutiny. In 1750, the Catholic Church placed the book on the Index of Prohibited Books due to its perceived challenge to religious and monarchical authority, prompting Montesquieu to write a defense, Défense de l'Esprit des Lois, 1750, where he clarified his arguments and refuted critics, including Jesuit theologians. He continued revising the spirit of the laws, incorporating feedback and expanding on ideas about governance, liberty, and the influence of climate and culture on laws. Montesquieu actively corresponded with Enlightenment figures like Voltaire, with whom he shared a complex relationship marked by mutual respect and occasional disagreement, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose emerging ideas on the social contract contrasted with Montesquieu's emphasis on institutional balance. He also engaged in debates through letters and Parisian salons, discussing political theory, religious tolerance, and societal reform with intellectuals like Diderot and d'Alembert, contributors to the Encyclopédie. Despite his wealth and noble status, he lived modestly, managing his estates with his wife, Jeanne de Lartigue, and spending time with his children and grandchildren. His health deteriorated, likely due to chronic illness, and in early 1755, while in Paris, he fell, ill with a fever. On February 10, 1755, Montesquieu died at age 66, leaving a legacy that shaped modern political thought, particularly through his ideas on the separation of powers. In 1755, Montesquieu was in Paris, likely to engage with intellectual circles and oversee matters related to his writings, including The Spirit of the Laws, 1748, which continued to spark debate after its condemnation by the Catholic Church in 1750. His health had been declining, possibly due to a chronic condition exacerbated by age. In early February, he contracted a fever, a common but often deadly ailment at the time, given the limited medical knowledge and treatments available. He passed away in his Paris residence, surrounded by family or close associates, though specific details about his final moments are sparse. His death was widely mourned in intellectual circles, as his ideas on the separation of powers, liberty, and comparative governance had already begun to shape political thought across Europe. Montesquieu's legacy endured, influencing the American and French revolutions and modern constitutional frameworks. His wife, Jeanne de l'Artigue, and children survived him, managing his estates at Château de la Brède.